Welcome to the Transform Sales Podcast, where forward-thinking business leaders come to share their experiences and ideas, learn from each other, and amplify their results together.
Hey guys, Amir Reiter here with the Transform Sales Podcast. I got my guest, John Karsant, CEO of LevelUp Leads. John, what's up, man? How are you?
Doing great, Amir. How's it going?
Good. It's been a couple of weeks since I saw you in Medellin. I think you're back in Buenos Aires.
I'm here in Argentina. Yep.
Enjoying that conversion rate. Always putting a smile on your face. Appreciate you having you on. It's been I think we've had the opportunity to work on a few clients together over the year, and I got a good opportunity to learn more about you personally and just the business you're running. But for the sake of the show, we typically have people who have either been first-time buyers of outsourced services or repeat buyers or people that are just considering it. And the idea here is to just kind of be transparent and talk about the problems and mistakes that buyers make so that they can put themselves in the shoes of a seller and become better prepared. Because as you know, when we're talking about meetings and pipelines, we're talking about a lot of revenue, and we're talking about a pretty big deal. And sales itself is the lifeblood of companies, and we want to stop buyers from just making some of the most common mistakes. But before we get into that, maybe you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself, who you are, and how you got into outsourced sales business to begin with.
Yeah, sure. Amir, thanks for having me on. I'm John, originally from California, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And about 8, maybe 9 years ago, I started getting into lead generation. Started out with solar lead generation, selling to installers. And then after a few years of that, did some other jobs, to cold calling, full sales cycle. And then about 4 years ago, I got into B2B lead generation for other companies. And so that's how I got into it. After a few years of experience, broke off and started my own company about 2 years ago. So that's LevelUp Leads, and that's how I got to where I am today.
So basically, you became an expert at B2B outbound yourself. You've then worked for companies that sold B2B as a service, and then with all of that background, you decided to launch your own company and help buyers of sales services succeed. In a nutshell,
exactly. Yeah,
sounds like a logical career. It sounds like a logical career path. I think we hear that often, and it's awesome. So you've been. How long has LevelUp Leads been around for?
About 2 years, a little under 2 years.
2 years. So let's dive into it. Over those 2 years, talk to me about mistakes that buyers make when searching for a sales agency provider. And obviously the mistakes that I'm talking about are less to do with, why they didn't close and become a customer, but more mistakes that make you say to yourself, man, this buyer is going to hire the wrong agency. And if they do, it's going to be for the wrong reasons. What comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, if that ever does come to mind, I typically try to point them in a better direction to a better fit. But some common ones I see are they're looking for a quick fix. They're looking for the agency to pull some magic trick out of their back pocket, and they expect results that are significantly better than they've seen either currently or in the past. So that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. Is it takes a little bit of time. It's companies need to learn what the other company that they're going to be reaching out on behalf of, learn a little bit about their product, their ICP, and it takes a little bit of time. I always tell people it's like a snowball effect. And as you get the ball rolling, it gets better and better over time. Those are the first things that come to mind. Let's see, what else?
Well, before you do that, for anybody listening, just unpack what you just said, right? It's the mistake of actually just not understanding what you're buying, right? Because if you're buying, it's like picture you're buying like a butterfly and it starts off as a caterpillar. You have to know that there's a certain amount of time that it stays in a cocoon, right? Mm-hmm. And if you broke that cocoon open up early, you got a dead butterfly, right? So I think it's what you're saying is that the biggest mistake that buyers make is not really understanding the time frames around the services they're buying to begin with. And that would ultimately impede them from purchasing from the right provider. Is that kind of top one?
Yeah. And also it's like expectations too, right? Like sometimes people come to you and they say, okay, I want X amount of meetings, okay, I want 15 meetings a week. And so you kind of try to like, okay, well, let's see how we could potentially do that. And then you start asking them questions like, well, what are you seeing now? I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
we're actually haven't started yet. So they're kind of coming in with these expectations that
Well,
sometimes.
yeah, and like if we talk about that, right? I think it has a lot to do with what you're buying, right? I think if you're buying like a 500 horsepower car, you put it on a dyno and it has 500 horsepower, you got what you wanted, right? But you're almost procuring a process that results through leads, and people that are coming in and they're guessing the results that they should expect, and it's coming from emotions, not data. And so they're trying to buy something, and then they're trying to like paint what they're buying without the experience. And it's typically naturally they're less likely to say, hey, sales agency provider, you have a year to do this, right? It's more likely like a shortened time frame
Exactly.
and it's more likely to be like, hey, John, I'd be happy if you book 2 meetings a month, but try to get 15. It's more like if 15 meetings is what I expect, if you get less, I want to fire you, right?
Exactly.
So it's like they're so in a lot of this, and if you realize why I'm asking you these questions, it's because how people buy sales services affects their output, right? That's the whole point of this conversation. It's to demonstrate that if you're buying a service that takes 2 people to tango, it takes planning, it takes your product market fit, it takes all these ingredients that buyers need to understand, that as much as having a credit card, having money is empowerment, that you can potentially have budget for the service, that sellers like yourself actually would be better serving a buyer that's highly educated in the buying process versus just having the ability to buy, right? So that makes sense. What other? And by the way, I think for anybody listening, it's always interesting to hear how a sales agency leader speaks. They always jump into KPIs and things because they are more concerned with your happiness versus winning your deal, right? So I don't think there's any sales agencies who like always focus on winning it. It's like always a blended thing, right? Because as soon as you win the deal, you're just winning the right to work together. And then the work that you do together is how you're being measured. It's not the deal, right? So let's focus, if you don't mind, because I'm going to ask you what mistakes they make during the process, but just on the buying side, what else you see, if anything, right? If that was the main thing, we stop there. But anything else that they do on the buying side that affects their ability to buy from the right provider?
I would say another thing that comes to mind is expecting there to be no risk involved. And so I always try to flip it back on them as like, what would it, if you were hiring someone internally, there would be a lot of risk, right? There'd be time involved in hiring. There'd be time involved in training. There'd be time in ramp up. And so then you'd be paying their salary on top of that. And so some people kind of expect that when they're going outsourcing this type of work, that there shouldn't really be much risk involved. But the flip side is if you were hiring internally, it'd be more expensive and there'd be a lot of risk. Like, what if that doesn't work out? I recently hired somebody and had to let him go because it just wasn't a good fit. That was a big waste of time and money. And that can happen happens all the time for companies. And so I think just trying to set the expectation and the value involved in outsourcing short term, and the results that they can expect, so that there is a risk involved, right? It could not work. That's
Yeah, but what we're really talking about here is logic, right? It's like the biggest mistake that buyers make is that they're not using logic, because if their options are hiring internally or 1099 or a freelancer, which has high risk, then they're not associating the fact that it's not logical to assume that now that it's a company, there's no risk, right?
exactly.
Well, good luck with that. You're dealing with a lot of unlogical buyers, John. So how do you solve for a problem like that? How does somebody prepare a buyer to purchase with a logical approach?
I try to weigh out the pros and cons and like, hey, these are the pros and cons of working with an outsourced agency like myself. Here are the pros and cons of hiring internally, and trying to push them on why I'm so good. Just kind of accept like, hey, these are your options. This is best short term. This is best long term, and let them make the decision. Way less pushy and kind of more like a conversation and helping them guide them to where they need to be. If that's using my agency, that's great. If it's not, I'll either refer them to someone else or maybe hire it internally, or both. They could hire internally and use us, is the best option for them.
Yeah, and I get it, right? Like, because that's you run a very ethical agency, right? I think the problem is that you win the customers that are a good match for you and that understand that you can calm them down and you could speak logic to them. But what happens to the buyers that don't take the advice and then they go to another company that promises them they can get results faster, that sells to their illogical decision making, not against it. And then the buyer is unhappy, and then the buyer says, I tried outsourcing sales, it doesn't work. How do you help those people? Is that my job? Maybe it's my job, I don't know, but that's kind of what I'm trying to tackle. I'm trying to tackle the buyers that just need that need to understand that they're eventually going to lose if they don't listen to logic, right? Like, how do we help them?
It's definitely a hurdle to overcome, because let's say they use a company and it doesn't work out and it leaves them with a bad taste in their mouth. So now they're looking for another solution with a very negative mindset. So it's definitely a challenge. And it happens. I actually just started working with a client I've been talking to for over a year. They went with 2 other agencies before they ended up going with me. So if the other agencies were so great, they would have stuck with them, right? So something happened. And then they come to you and they're looking for magic, looking for,
they used their runaway, right? Like they didn't take the advice. They picked wrong. Their budget went from here to here. Now they are expecting more with less, right?
Exactly.
And it's ultimately it's good for people to hear that, because, like I said before, my goal is to counter that, right? It's to get people to buy with logic, not emotion, to protect themselves, right? Maybe we recommend this. We recommend a lot of times for people to hire 2 to 3 agencies at the same time, right? And support them all to succeed, because at the very best you have 3 that succeed. But if one doesn't succeed, you have other 2 buffers, right? And we do that a lot with startups, so that they don't have to go from one agency to the next agency to the next agency, do 3 at the same time, because the time to go from one to the next, your pipeline is down, your budget's down, right? And I think it sounds almost like you're trying to upsell somebody, but from our position as a marketplace, it comes off as honesty, and it works pretty well. Let's talk about what happens now that a buyer was logical. A buyer came in with the right time frame. They selected LevelUp Leads. You're working with them. What is the most common mistake you see from buyers that are actively in a pilot or an agreement with a sales agency?
So they've already started and they're in the process of working.
Yeah, they picked you. Everything seemed great, and now what's this, like, the common theme where it's a behavior or a buyer's behavior that ultimately hurts them from achieving the results that they expect and that you as a provider were there to deliver?
Mm-hmm. I'd say a common one is kind of falling back to what they've done before. So they hire you, you're giving them, you either write the message or the outreach, and then they come in and kind of do all these changes. And it's back to kind of what they were doing before. And you kind of have to push back a little bit. It's like, hey, then why'd you hire me if you're just going to do the same exact thing that wasn't working before? That's one. So being open and willing to change. And some people are great. Like they give you all the authority to do what you need. And some people really have a hard time kind of changing or doing a new approach. I would say that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. So it's like the same thing of, like, don't hire a personal trainer if you plan on continuing to eat
That's
sugar
a great
every day,
analogy.
right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the stuff that, we're humans, right? And I think our behaviors, they kind of repeat themselves in our personal relationships, our professional life, the way we buy things, right? It's kind of the same thing. It's like if you don't expect to change, like, I've done this, right? I lived in Colombia for 7 years and I paid like $800 multiple times for training on Spanish, and I just didn't take the courses, right? I was a good buyer. I gave them money. I didn't complain. But if I don't change that behavior of actually taking the courses, I'm not going to learn Spanish, right? So it's interesting because it's like very hard as a sales agency. You can't sell. Now they sign an agreement, right? And you're like, you send them another contract, and it's like line one. It's like, you're going to listen to me this time, right? It's like, you're not going to fall back to old patterns and behaviors, right? It's almost too much, right? Because if you go that route, you could scare off a buyer, even though what you're really doing is caring for them, right? And it's like a fine balance between caring for a buyer and what they get, and sometimes seeming like, you're too much or too overwhelming, or it's too much to do. And then they're like, I just want to do this. Oh, I'm going to go to that company that said I need, only to be with them 2 hours a week. Right. So I think people always are looking for easy, right? That's the problem. And I think I remind anyone listening to this, if you're a buyer of sales services, keep in mind, if you're a software company, every $1 million of revenue is potentially $10 million of valuation. That is what you tout to your investors and your friends, right? So should that be easy, right? Like, should it be easy to sell $1 million and make $10 million of valuation? I would go ahead and say no, right? So if you think you're buying something that's going to sell $1 million in revenue, get you $2 million valuation, it's supposed to be easy, think again, right? It's not easy, back to the training thing, to get a six pack, even if you want one. That takes a lot of diet and dedication, right? So I think buyers that are listening to this, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would jump in and say, to start, it might involve a little bit of work, but as you get going, it'll get easier and easier with time. So there's always a little bit of time involved from both ends to start.
Yeah.
And then over time, it'll get easier.
But what are your thoughts about like real-time communication versus like meetings, right? Like, I talk to you on WhatsApp, and we speak to each other like we're teammates, right? Like, you need something, I give it to you. I need something, I give it to you. Like, it's back and forth, right? Do you recommend that people do like Zoom onboarding meetings on a set schedule, or do you recommend an environment that has real-time communication through Slack or WhatsApp or something like that?
Both. So we do one onboarding call. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes. Then from there, it's either communication like a WhatsApp or Slack or text or email. So both. But after that onboarding call, there really shouldn't be that much more in terms of onboarding. Should be able to knock that out if you have your questions in line. And then if you want to do check-in calls later, you can do that.
Yeah. Well, do you think that the time on onboarding has a lot to do with also like the maturity of a company? Meaning that if you have like call it a Series B company, they have product market fit. They're like, John, hey, do these activities, get that. That might need less onboarding than a company that has basically assumptions, because, assumptions might be able to be correct, or they might, you don't want to take a message and an offer and run it for 90 days to somebody who doesn't respond to it well. Then you come back to the company and you're like, we didn't get results, and they're like, you're fired. Versus, does the amount of time needed on onboarding change based on your product market fit of the buyer?
No, I don't think it's that. It's that onboarding shouldn't be that challenging. Now, there is times where a company would have multiple products that go into different industries, and so that might take a little bit more time because you're essentially doing two in one. But for the companies that don't have that, which is the majority, no, it's not. It's not that challenging, as long as they have the information, which at times they don't. It's just not that complicated of an onboarding process.
Yeah. Well, I'm not trying to paint it as complicated. I guess what I'm trying to do is let buyers know that, like, you should be prepared for both, right? I think whether it's complicated or not is less important than the results they get. Meaning that if the results they get are paramount, then they should be flexible to spend more or less time if needed, right? And I think that's the message I'd like to get across for buyers, right? I think as a seller, I think there's always a tendency to be like, this is easy. This is not like pulling teeth, right? Because we want sellers to hire us, right?
Mm-hmm. One thing I'd jump in and say is like a common one I see is not having like any marketing material. So like someone asks for more information so they can share with their team, and the company we're working with doesn't actually have anything, or they don't even have like a LinkedIn page set up. I'm like, you got to get some of this basic stuff set up so you can at least look decent or appear decent from the outside.
Let's go deeper, right? If data says that customers are 85% ready to buy when they meet with you, then I think it's almost required to have websites and materials that are clear, because the data is there that buyers are less likely to be won over by a sales rep's personality on a call and more educated by the time they get to a sales rep. That's probably, and it's hard to say that, right? Have you ever feel as a seller that if you tell a buyer that they might just take 6 months, not hire somebody because they won't get it done? Do you ever face a challenge between telling a buyer, yes, we can start now versus come back to me in 6 months when your website's done?
Well, yeah, website example is a good one. Like if the website's not done, I would hold off. But sometimes I don't even know they don't have any marketing material until we start. It's like, oh, okay. Can you guys work on that? Like, because our job is to generate interested leads and they want more information or they want to set up a call. But if you don't have anything, it's not a good look. Like it's
like getting soldiers and then saying, hey, we don't have a factory for the weapons.
Yeah, or like imagine just like
I want to get the factories for the weapons first.
It's like, oh, you want to buy a car? It's like, oh, we only have photos. No, you can't actually see it, or something like that. Like it's you want to at least have something they can share internally.
That's good for an MVP, right? If the campaign itself is, hey, before we build out our complex product, we want to see if it has product market fit. But that's like an MVP campaign. It's not designed for an ROI. It's designed to say, hey, should we actually build what we're selling? That's possible, right?
So that's an idea. Happens.
Yeah, I'm thinking it through my head because what I personally believe, I think a lot of the buyer mistakes is that there's just not a lot of education around the different types of campaigns, the different speeds it takes, right? Because it's not sexy, right? I think for the last 5 years, everybody got really turned on by the billion-dollar software companies, the Apollos, the LinkedIn automation. They got really turned on by the sizzle of the activity versus the stake of what you're selling, right? There was not really an explosion of GTM, go-to-market plans, ROI planning, right? It's like this hole of despair where, especially the American market got more obsessed with the bigger weapons versus the military plan, right? Because I think people who are buyers, I'm like, how oftentimes have you seen buyers that were looking for an ROI on cash on what they told you was a 9-month sales cycle, 6 months? Like, how many times do you see buyers that like went against what they told you, like logically? Is it common or uncommon?
It's common. I think people.
What percentage of the time?
Well, I don't have a percentage, but a lot of
90?
the companies we work with are small. I don't have numbers, but I would say this: people make changes frequently because they're unsure of product market fit or ICP or industry, or title they want to be targeting. So sometimes you start with one thing and then all of a sudden we totally flip and go another route because we're trying to figure out where they fit the best or where they're going to have the most success in outreach. So there's lots.
Talk to me about your best fit client. Someone's listening here. They want to outsource sales. You can only pick one industry that they're selling, product or sales, software or services. You can only pick one. What do you pick?
I have it down where my clients have historically been 75% SaaS products, 25% service. So can do both, but I'm getting to it. So
for anybody listening, John can do everything. Yeah.
But the perfect fit would be a SaaS company. I've seen really good success with that, and a SaaS product that is unique in some way, something that stands out.
Unique selling proposition, like a USP.
Something that stands out, right? Like if you have a CRM and there's 80 other CRMs, it's going to be very challenging. If you have some unique drone product that can like analyze fields for agriculture better than the human eye or whatever, something unique, all of a sudden it really helps out with campaign results and overall success.
Yeah, it's like winning keywords, right? Like if you're going to go after the heaviest keyword like Google, it's hard. You got to look for what you can win, right? Competition does matter. Anybody listening too, it's interesting when I ask a sales agency owner that question. There's always going to be an answer of we do both because it's not easy for passionate leaders that love helping revenue to be exclusive of somebody, and that's kind of why I asked that question, right? I asked that question just to kind of see, if you were forced to be exclusive, which you would pick, right? your answer is software and USP, and I like it because it's honest, and it's nothing wrong with that, and it has nothing to do with you not being able to service someone else. It just has to do with that there's many different businesses out there, and some of them scale better than others, and software companies that have unique selling propositions tend to scale better than service companies. That's just a factual thing, and it doesn't mean that service companies aren't profitable and aren't helpful and aren't useful at all by any means. What about size of the company, or what's your sweet spot? Startup, seed round, Series A, Series B, publicly traded, or privately held?
For us, it's not as important in terms of the funding round, but company size. So our sweet spot would be anywhere between 5 to 75 employees and a team that is low on bandwidth. So they're wearing a lot of hats. They don't have the time or the expertise on the outreach, and that's where we come in. So that's our sweet spot.
They need you. Good. It's clear. What about regions? EMEA, United States. What's that spot? That sweet spot for you guys?
Depends on the service. So if we're running actual lead gen campaigns, ideally it's in the States, Canada, or Europe, although we can go worldwide. So like I have one of my clients is targeting Africa and Asia right now, and we're seeing really good results. So it depends.
Less competition.
What?
Less competition.
Yeah. They have a really cool product though. But those are the main regions we focus on is North America and Europe.
So if you're a software company looking to sell in North America, 5 to 71 employees is kind of broad, but the most important thing is that you have a limited bandwidth. Then LevelUp Leads is good to talk to you. And I know why. It's because John's super personal, runs a small boutique where he actually acts like he's part of the company. So it all makes sense to me. I get it. John, this has been awesome. I know we're going to have you back on the shows. We're going to be diving deeper into different topics, all centered around helping buyers and sellers. If anybody wants to connect with you, what's your best channel? Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Where can they reach out to pick your brain on everything you've learned over the last so many years in the space?
2 best spots would be my website, levelupleads.io, or my LinkedIn, John Karsant, Karsant. You can find me there.
John, you're the man, dude. I appreciate your time. As always, looking forward to seeing you at the Sales Agency Growth Summit. You better be here. And maybe next week.
When is it?
Buenos Aires. May 12th, man. I told you 14 times.
Okay.
Not listening to me. I'm just kidding. Everybody, thank you for listening. I'm signing off. John, thank you.
Thanks, Amir.
Take
See
care,
you guys.
man. Bye-bye.